More than 4 years later, someone is finally standing trial for the killing of Jennifer Dulos, Connecticut mother of 5. That someone, Michelle Troconis. But the tragic unfolding of this story has reminded people of the harsh reality of domestic violence. We're talking about prevention and policy ahead. But first, we're taking on technology, from rapid development and life-saving tools to safety fears and needed regulation. Joining us is the state senator supporting Connecticut's response to artificial intelligence. What you need to know this morning on The Real Story. Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. It's part of our everyday, every aspect of our lives, and everyone is talking about regulation, tech, big tech, and artificial intelligence. We saw innovation in artificial chat, art, robotics, transportation, and more take over the Consumer Electronics Convention. But it didn't stop there. At the same time, across the country, health presenters covered new technological uses, from everyday doctor visits to the emergency room. Business conferences shared how they're making AI part of their everyday efficiency. But not everyone is giving AI a warm welcome to their industry. We've seen major strikes like those in Hollywood to journalism. People are admitting they feel a need to lean into using the tech while also trying to make clear rules around it. One thing's for sure, it's here and it's rapidly developing, and we've got to talk about it. So here to do just that is Republican State Senator Tony Hwang, who's currently serving on the state's new AI task force. Senator Hwang, thank you as always for being here.
It's great to be here, and it is such an important subject matter, but it's one that is widely misunderstood. Yeah. You hear so much about AI and its implications and the potential hyperbole of it all, but what does it really mean? Simplified, artificial intelligence in the utilization is data inputting, machine learning that takes thousands upon thousands of data and knowledge input, processes it, and be able to kind of articulate. So you get 100 million pictures of a cat, and a computer identifies what a cat looks like. So when it sees one, it understands it, or a dog. But we're using that in regards to data input to kind of help us with processes, to be able to simplify process and really to create efficiencies in how we manage and govern. So it's really that simple, but technology at its onset is daunting. Absolutely. And it's very frightening for a lot of people who don't understand it. I wish we could move back in time to think about how the automobile replaced the horse-drawn carriage, sure, to think about maybe even 25, 30 years ago about microcomputing and how that's changed and now exists in our lives. It's going to have dramatic challenges, and this is what the task force that was passed out of the legislative committee in the General Assembly is looking to address, is creating a task force, really evaluating and understanding from the experts. But I think for me, one of the most important parts is to relate AI to the general public, right, to make them understand when we talk about AI, it's already existing, right, from the social media algorithms that kind of identify the videos that you like, the purchases on e-commerce, that when you look at a pair of shoes, you're going to get 30 different shoes, whether you like it or not. There are economic factors, but then there are arts and creativity concerns. So it's all around us, and trying to understand it requires tremendous expertise, right, but I also think it is critically important for us policymakers to simplify and explain.
And with that, the state has been working on a digital equity plan, not just talking about affordable and accessible internet, but teaching people things like internet safety and cybersecurity, as you were saying, relaying that information to the general public. How important is that to you? And do you think there needs to be widespread or even mandated education for people?
Well, education is one of the most compelling components. And there was an example where the entire Board of Education in New York City at the beginning of last year banned ChatGPT from its use and on its campuses. And they reversed that decision months later, because I think the educators understood that technology was not going to wait, and that one of the critical roles of education is to teach our students to adapt and utilize technology, but also to understand it and not put our head in the sand. Right. And I think that's one of the most important parts is we need to create a better understanding, not driven by fear, but based upon knowledge and understanding and education. But still, the portrayal in our entertainment and all the aspects of it creates this kind of hyperbole of complexity. Right. When the simple part is it's data in and impacting out. Right. And if we can do that, but it's at a higher level of capacity than we've ever imagined.
Well, and obviously in some aspects, as you've already hit on a little bit, it really can be an amazing tool for people to use, but as we've been saying, it can also be really scary for some people. What are some of the state's safety priorities when it comes to AI?
Well, I think the first and foremost is data privacy, right. The utilization of data and collection of data. I think the second critical part is a sense of social equity and bias, because as I said, the algorithm takes data in. The human beings with their emotions and biases and kind of input is what goes in and processes it. So if we're not sensitive about social equity and bias and racial dynamics and economic dynamics, then we are putting in information that affects people across the whole spectrum. I think the other critical fact is truly protection of intellectual properties, and also to understand it can be overused. An invasion of privacy, an invasion of real concerns. I brought up the earlier example of e-commerce and looking at one shoe and having 30 pop up. I think it's, in some people's minds, a violation of their privacy with their data input and not having control over it. It's really a difficult thing. And I would also add, the federal government needs to address this issue. But where we have in the state of Connecticut and many of the other state leaderships is we're able to adapt quicker and implement policies a little quicker. But the federal government needs to take an initiative as well.
Well, and when we talk about safety regulations, I know one thing in particular a lot of people are concerned about are deepfakes. What are any policy options here? How does law enforcement take on these sort of new changing crimes related to technology?
It is really an unknown area. And you know, we have election cycle coming up, a presidential as well as all the state legislative elections. The deep fake and the fake information is so pervasive, and it can seem so real. I think there was certain examples of voice emulation of individuals. The deep fake is really a unknown, but also extremely fearful. And that goes back to what we're trying to do as a task force and as advocates, is to say, how can we understand it better? And then how can we make sure that it's not used for ill purposes? Right.
And we've seen with tech that already exists, like AI scam calls or robocalls in our state. Here in Connecticut, Attorney General William Hwang has tried to take, a forefront here, really trying to take action against a lot of those scam calls and robocalls. But what about tech which hasn't been fully developed yet? How can we as a state and specifically lawmakers stay ahead as things are changing so quickly?
Well, I think one of the challenges is legislators are good policy people. Right. There's tremendous technology innovation, and the fast pace of it is really hard to fully understand. And one of the concerns I had is the policies we're talking about today may not be relevant 9 to 12 months from now. So there are real concerns about implication. But I think for me, it's one of the most important roles that we have is to educate, to raise awareness, to make people understand and utilize this technology rather than to be afraid and to deny it. Yep. It really is a powerful differential. If you can understand something, then you feel a little better to manage and control it. In our history, technology has always gone through that adoption process, deep-seated within fear and misunderstanding and change. Change is necessary and relevant, particularly with a fast change in technology, but it needs to serve a purpose, and it needs to be managed effectively.
Yeah. And that's some of the challenge right there in regulating technology, is how quickly it's changing. But, while development can be used in a bad way, it can also be used in a good way too. Let's talk about Connecticut's healthcare industry. How have you seen AI at work there?
Well, it's created greater efficiencies in utilization review, in diagnostics, the vast collection of data. One of the big landmark legislation we've been able to bipartisanly pass is benchmarking of data points. But we can take data points not only from regions and states, but nationally. But the power of that computational power is immense and impressive. So those are kind of the technology we can understand. But I also think there's a concern. One of the concerns in AI, as I said before, it's what you put in. And there are cases in which knowledge-based decision-making, the nuance of decision-making need to be understood. The human emotional element of healthcare, the personal impact of healthcare needs to be understood. I think our insurance industry and our care providers need to understand that the most promulgated solutions may not be the relevant one or effective one for one individual. So we need to be very careful that AI and decision making does not bypass the personal nuance touch in decision making, particularly when it comes to healthcare and personal impact. If you're talking about getting a driver's license or getting a prescription filled, those systems work effectively because they're task specific. But we need to be very careful about knowledge-based nuanced decision making, that the machines does not replace a human element.
Implementing the AI in a smaller way, in a smart and educated way, as you were saying, as opposed to just,
Correct.
Either completely denying it or using it for everything.
And another big critical part that scares people is the implementation of AI and the knowledge-based interpretation will impact workforce numbers. And I think that's the important part, is we need to understand that the rudimentary task specific, they were always going to be eventually replaced by technology. You see it already. But the knowledge base needs to be a collaborative effort to buy into it. But I think the other part of it is we need to readapt our workforce training to look at digital technology and to understand there is tremendous skill set needs, but our education and workforce development needs to understand these nuanced changes, because what may be lost in one area may be gained by multiples in other areas. But make no mistake about it, as more knowledge base gets incorporated into AI, you're going to lose a higher level of skill sets and education eventually down the road.
Right. And on the state task force, you're obviously getting reports and recommendations from a lot of different people, but one of those has been schools. And I know you mentioned before some examples of educational boards of education banning ChatGPT. I know AI and ChatGPT has been a huge conversation when it comes to elementary as well as high school and even colleges. So a lot of schools are saying they need high-powered computer centers to stay on top of this. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're learning about this technology in education in schools?
Well, I think we need to underline that commitment to the technology in our education, because these young students need to develop the skills in order to adapt in the current marketplace. But it's also about social equity and access to the technology and internet. I want to take an extra shout out to the two co-chairs of the task force, Senator Maroney as well as Mr. Nick Donofrio, who is an ex-IBM executive. These two co-chairs have been tremendous in coalescing and gathering information, a lot of data, a lot of sophisticated information, and they've been working tirelessly. So a big shout out and credit, and also all the various contributing members. But I think for us as legislators, one of the questions I posed was, how do we take all this information, simplify it, synthesize it, and really put it into practical policy that people can understand, and we can help empower them to make this technology work for all of us.
Yeah. And, we know the state of Connecticut is big on tech when it comes to engineering, but there are also people here who are working to develop AI technology right here in the state, not just use it, but develop it. How do you think the state can keep getting in on the ground floor? And should there be any sort of legislative investment to our own tech development here in Connecticut?
Well, we've got some great companies, Infosys, Indeed.com, and small businesses that drive the innovation, but they're craving and they're just in desperate need of workforce talent. So again, when we talk about AI in our schools and being able to develop a educated workforce that can gravitate and develop and utilize these skills, it is all about workforce. And it doesn't have to be 2-year, 4-year colleges. You can code and go into a very specific narrow area, but the ultimate aspect is workforce and skills and a development of that to be able to feed the need. The need is going to be just a constant. Yeah. And for us to be able to compete as Connecticut, when you have nearby fulcrums of knowledge and education, we need to leverage that, keep that talent here, nurture that talent, and ultimately be able to use that to compete at the highest level, nationally and internationally.
Well, Senator Hwang, I wish we had more time. It's always great to sit down and chat with you.
Thank you for having me, but this is a work of many, many people that believe in this, and I think if there's nothing else we do as policymakers is to spread the gospel that technology is helpful, but it needs to be understood.
Absolutely. It's all about education, and we'll obviously keep closely covering this throughout the legislative session, which starts in just under a month, talking about how tech policy will be happening this session. And over our next episodes, The Real Story will be talking to state industry leaders about how artificial intelligence is changing in their field. But there's still more to come here this morning. We're talking about the Michelle Troconis trial with team coverage. We're focusing in on how Jennifer Dulos' death has brought domestic violence laws and resources to the forefront here in Connecticut. Stay with us.